Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to our monthly Great Lakes Green Chemistry Network and Michigan Green Chemistry Clearinghouse webinar on topics of interest to green chemistry. We're very happy to have you with us today and welcome you to this month's webinar, the Green Chemistry Checklist, a guide for businesses. Well, today, as I said, the webinar is the Green Chemistry Checklist, a guide for businesses. And this was developed by the Michigan Green Chemistry Roundtable. And I'll give you a very brief background on the Michigan Green Chemistry Roundtable. It was created as part of an executive directive in 2006 by the then Governor Jennifer Granholm in the state of Michigan. I'm not going to go into too much detail about it because I know that the webinar is going to discuss its history and its purpose. But it is very innovative, and it is the only state that I'm aware of in the United States to have such a roundtable. And it has been very influential in that regard in being a leader in promoting green chemistry among the states in this country. So without further discussion, I'm going to turn it over to two representatives of the Michigan Green Chemistry Roundtable who will be doing the presentation today on the Roundtable's behalf. And that is Rich Helling from the Dow Chemical Company and Tracey Easthope from the Ecology Center. And I want to give our thanks to both of them for participating and just turn it over to them. Thank you.
Great. Thanks, Lynn, for the introductions. Tracey and I are pleased to be here today on behalf of the Michigan Green Chemistry Roundtable to talk about version 1 of a checklist that the Roundtable developed to help businesses track the pursuit and implementation of green chemistry. And if I get my pointer in the right place, there we go. What we want to talk about this afternoon are four things. First, a little bit more about our organization, the Michigan Green Chemistry Roundtable, some about a sister organization, the Green Chemistry and Commerce Council, or GC3, and in particular the policy statement that group created. We'll get to our checklist, which was derived in part from the policy statement GC3 created, but with more of a focus on what businesses can do. And finally, a request to anybody on the webinar this afternoon to help participate in testing and trying out the checklist and giving us feedback so that we can create a new and better version 2. But before we get to these topics, I'll spend just a moment to review why, of course, we're interested in green chemistry, and hopefully this will be very familiar with everyone on the webinar this afternoon. But in case there's any new folks to the field of green chemistry, I'll do this review. So businesses can be driven to use green chemistry, of course, directly for their own benefit, but also driven by the demand and the desires from our customers and consumers. The goals of customers and consumers can be quite in line with what a company exists to provide. That's effective and useful products that are lower in cost and safer to use. Concerns about cost and safety drive what people buy, and what businesses produce, and how things are produced. And of course, green chemistry is an approach or really a mindset together with the principles and tools that can help us do that. Lynn mentioned the executive order that helped bring these things together in Michigan and created the Roundtable. Currently, the Roundtable members include people from academia, business, both producers of chemicals and users of chemicals, NGOs, and consultants. It's a true multi-stakeholder group. The Michigan Department of Environmental Quality, or DEQ, has been our effective primary administrative party, helping to organize our efforts and acting as the honest broker or the neutral facilitator in our discussions. I personally have been involved with the Roundtable for about 3 years, and it's a really engaging and a motivated group of people to work with. Since the beginning, one of the goals, of course, the goal has been to promote the use of green chemistry principles for the purposes of economic development and improved public health. The Roundtable developed and implemented a green chemistry program that had strategic elements related to education, economic activity, communications, and expanding the capacity to develop and practice green chemistry in Michigan. One very specific result from this plan was the creation and operation of the Michigan Green Chemistry and Engineering Conferences, also known as the Green Up Conferences, for which the fifth installment was held last month at Grand Valley State University. Another was the creation and administration of the Michigan Green Chemistry Governor's Award Program, which has some similar aspects to the Presidential Award in Green Chemistry run by the EPA, but also with some key differences. In the Michigan program, we can recognize education and advocacy as award categories, and also an essential criterion is that the works and the projects create economic value and improved health in Michigan. Earlier this year, a working group from the Roundtable started to look at updating the strategic plan since we were nearing the end of its 5-year time horizon. And we knew that our vision included having a workforce that was trained in the principles of green chemistry and engineering, and that was applying them successfully in Michigan. But how might one best be able to track and measure this? And so part of our answer to that came from the sister organization, the Green Chemistry and Commerce Council. So let me introduce them to you. GC3 is a business forum, or forum for business-to-business communications, run through the Lowell Center of Sustainable Production at the University of Massachusetts. And its focus is application of green chemistry principles across supply chain. So it has a really clear focus in that area. This group works by annually developing a short list of very specific projects to work on. One of the projects that was worked on last year was developing a policy statement to articulate what businesses wanted to see in and from green chemistry education. And in return for these demands, if you will, on academia, what businesses would do with a supply of graduates well-trained with green chemistry principles. Some of the elements that the GC3 felt were important to understand and implement green chemistry are shown on this slide. And of course, you have to start with the fundamentals, the 12 principles of green chemistry, as in the book by Anastas and Warner, and then the 2 similar compilations of principles of green engineering. And collectively, these describe the importance of mass efficiency and energy efficiency, hazard reduction, and really thinking holistically about products and processes. It's also an important part of green chemistry to understand the fate and transport of materials in the environment, and how this plus molecular structure all interact to result in toxicological impacts, or really toxicology 101. One needs to also understand that chemicals are produced to provide a function to a market, so the concepts of markets and economics and trade-offs are also important. And finally, there needs to be an awareness of the regulatory framework that the production and use of chemicals occurs in. And although these skills need to be most fully developed in scientists working with chemicals and with materials, there needs to be some familiarity with these principles and issues across a wide range of disciplines. And so this is what the policy statement described and defined as what students and professionals need to know. And to provide incentive for this, the statement also describes some key roles for businesses. And we can characterize these into 4 broad themes. Supporting continuing education in green chemistry topics for people across the supply chain of products. Having hiring practices that show preference for people with these skills. Supporting academic institutions and suppliers who share this vision and work to advance it. and also, of course, applying the principles in business to generate innovations. This policy statement was signed by a wide range of companies, and the list of signers is shown here, which includes several based in Michigan and the Great Lakes region. So now that I've covered a little bit of the history of the Green Chemistry Roundtable and the GC3 policy statement, I'll get to what the Roundtable's industry working group recognized, and that's that elements of this policy statement really made a great framework for describing what both an academic and a business environment might look like with a wider appreciation of the principles of green chemistry and engineering. And it gave us a great way to craft metrics to help figure out, are we there yet, or how we can track our journey. Businesses always have the option of becoming a formal signer of the statement, but what we wanted to do was develop a checklist to help a business understand its position and progress with a greater granularity than a simple binary yes/no with respect to this policy statement. So I'll pass the electronic baton on to Tracey, and she will talk a little bit more about the checklist elements in detail.
Thanks, Rich. And thanks, Lynn. Yeah, I'm going to talk in more detail about the specifics of the checklist. As Rich mentioned, rather than just encouraging businesses to just sign on to the GC3 statement, we really asked the question, well, what does that mean to sign on to the statement? And how would a business measure themselves how they're implementing green chemistry? And so we came up with this idea of the checklist. I want to make just a few points before walking through the checklist with you. We sought input on the checklist through the Green Chemistry and Commerce Council and received feedback from several business leaders, NGOs, and academics. And we did revise it as a result of that input. But we're still really interested in feedback. That's why it's version 1.0. And so we expect to further refine this as we roll it out and pilot it. So please feel free to send comments. One of the things we heard from our reviewers is that manufacturers of products don't always think of the practice of green chemistry as relevant to them. So we actually want to make it really clear that we designed the tool to be relevant for both manufacturers of products as well as chemical manufacturers. And any input here on how to make it more relevant is definitely welcome. The tool is meant to be complementary to comprehensive chemicals management programs that companies may have adopted. It's not meant to substitute for those management systems, which are really critical. This is obviously a voluntary tool and meant to help identify benchmarks and metrics that companies can use internally to monitor progress. But we do want to encourage external reporting of progress, and that's actually one of the recommended activities in the checklist. The areas covered in the checklist were bounded by the GC3 document, so we operated under that constraint when coming up with the checklist activities. So there are 4 areas of activity we've identified which follow from the GC3 statement that Rich just described and outlined, and they are education, hiring, support and communication, and design and innovation. We're suggesting that companies should try and have activity in each of the 4 areas with increasing activity over time. So Rich covered this. I'm not going to really go into this in much detail, but we do include in the checklist that we really broadly mean the principles of green chemistry, including efforts to create safer chemicals, products, and processes, and other activities to advance that goal. And we do want to explicitly call out the importance of understanding that molecular material design does impact environmental and human health, and that attributes like environmental fate, transport, and biogeochemistry are critical to consider. So again, through comments from reviewers, we were really encouraged to make this explicit. Next slide. So the first area of the checklist is education. The major focus in this section is on identifying training opportunities for employees and suppliers. It also urges companies to work within their trade associations or professional associations to identify opportunities to sponsor seminars or training on these ideas. There are recommended activities around the importance of recognizing outstanding work in green chemistry and engineering among both employees and suppliers, and it encourages that compensation considerations reflect that outstanding work. The second area is hiring. The activities in this section include making sure there's explicit reference to the desire for green chemistry and engineering academic training in all relevant job postings. This is really critically important, we've heard, to help drive the training of students in green chemistry, basically to help provide additional pressure on academic institutions to teach these competencies. Other activities in this area include hiring candidates with green chemistry and engineering training, all things being equal, and incorporating green chemistry goals in performance requirements for new hires. The third area is support and communication. The activities in this area are meant to broadly encourage work with academic institutions to both promote and support green chemistry training and practice, including things like providing internship placements for students to work in green chemistry. It also includes a goal of extensive communication of the company's green chemistry goals, both within the company and with suppliers, and it encourages public reporting on the company's green chemistry commitments. The fourth area is design and innovation. Activities here include establishing green chemistry product and process development as a primary goal of the organization and setting and monitoring these goals. Embedding green chemistry design criteria in product design guidelines and at each stage gate of product development. Including green chemistry criteria and relevant sourcing contracts, screening all new chemical ingredients for green chemistry attributes, devoting R&D dollars for green chemistry innovation, commercializing products with green chemistry advantages over existing chemicals or products, as well as going a step further in commercializing inherently green products. And it also includes commercializing products that are designed to be restorative or to increase resilience in ecosystems. I think that's certainly the highest bar goal in the checklist. So next slide. For each activity, there are suggested metrics. This is a screenshot from the checklist showing the metrics for the hiring section. Next slide. And this one just provides examples of the kinds of suggested metrics that have been identified in each suggested area of activity. I'm not going to go into detail about any of these, but they are available with the checklist. I also want to note another feature we're hoping to provide is a set of resources that will provide guidance on implementing each of the activities that are outlined in the checklist. Next slide. We're really interested in getting feedback on the checklist and are looking for businesses to pilot it. You can download the checklist from the website URL on the screen. We're starting to pilot the checklist now and hope to get input for the better part of 2014. At the end of 2014, I think we'll evaluate it and make modifications before releasing another version. Piloting the checklist can be really informal. We just like feedback on how it went, what the barriers were, what parts of the business need to be engaged, and how it was implemented. We'll likely create a feedback input form to learn from the pilot. You can also just download it and use it without piloting it officially. We've already had some interest, and several businesses have taken the checklist and are vetting it in their companies, but we're now actively recruiting companies to help us pilot it. Last slide. So that's it. Thanks very much. This is, again, the URL for the checklist, and we look forward to questions and comments.
Thanks very much, Tracy. Many of the checklist questions are outputs, number of persons in training, for instance. True valued metrics include outcomes like reduced toxic chemicals use or tons of waste, etc. So, can you address that?
Sure, I completely. Maybe I'll take it first, Rich, sure. and then Clinton, who's also on the roundtable. I'd be interested in hearing his comments. I think that's an excellent comment, and I think that that we're well aware of that. We wanted to make sure that this was implementable, and And so I think sometimes those next steps are harder to get metrics on and correlate them with the activity. But I think suggestions on those kinds of metrics would be welcome.
Anyone else want to comment on that? Okay, our next question is the pilot available to industry outside of Michigan?
Absolutely. We have a focus, obviously, on Michigan companies, but we're doing this webinar in the Great Lakes and obviously are interested in any companies using it if they think it's useful, and obviously we're interested in feedback from wherever we can get it.
Okay, what size businesses are you seeking for the piloting process?
All sizes.
All sizes?
Absolutely, because these kinds of activities make sense for everybody to use, regardless of the size of your enterprise. Granted, some of the questions, if you read them, they kind of are written with the mindset or the framework of a larger company, just in terms of how we've phrased them. But we're absolutely interested in input from all sizes of companies.
And we did actually change some of the question and metrics in order to recognize that, for instance, around training, that companies should seek out opportunities for training, and they might not necessarily be able to provide that training to their employees. I think that's a recognition of a smaller company versus a larger company. So we did try and think about that in the development of the questions, but I think we can do better on that as well. But absolutely, I think all sizes of companies are welcome to pilot the checklist.
Great job with the checklist. Have you been able to ID training courses available in Michigan that companies could use for employees or new hires?
Training, so that would, I'm assuming they're meaning not training on the checklist, but trainings that would, like those that we recommend in the
Correct.
checklist.
Yeah.
And I think that's the next stage for us, is to actually begin to provide a guidance document for people who want to use this, so that we can identify things exactly like that. That would help companies implement the checklist.
Clarifies that she means green chemistry training.
Yeah, yes. Yeah, I think we haven't, we haven't done that. Certainly the GC3 has regular webinars that would be an example of that kind of thing, but we haven't, but will, I think.
Yeah, and to the extent that those kinds of things are identified, we'd be really, the Great Lakes Green Chemistry Network, and I'm sure the Clearinghouse would be really interested in that as well, because we would like to disseminate that information throughout our networks as well, and help out in any way that we can in finding those kinds of trainings, and not just in Michigan, but throughout the Great Lakes region, to facilitate that kind of training wherever possible. So I just want to throw that in.
Yeah, and I think, maybe we can also work with our partners, the GC3, in thinking more systematically about ways in which we can actually try and create and promote more webinar training opportunities.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and just as an example, just to put in a little plug here, the Great Lakes Green Chemistry Network and the Institute for Agriculture and Trade Policy have been doing a series of workshops around the Great Lakes Basin. We just did one in Wisconsin last week, and we will be doing another one in Minneapolis in January in conjunction with the Minneapolis Green Chemistry Forum's annual meeting in Minneapolis. And we will be doing a workshop the day before on tools for green chemistry for businesses called Safe Products, Safer, oh, this is so terrible. I always get these brain freezes at the wrong time. Safer Products Made Safely, tools for businesses. And then there will also be a green screen training at this, also around that, that conference. And then after that, we'll also be doing a series of webinars that will be open to anyone who's interested. Now, that's not quite the same kind of training I know that's being referred to, but it's a component of that kind of training. So we just want to let people know that that will be available as well. And we will also be really interested in working with the GC3 and others to make those kinds of trainings available. So here's another question. Is it okay to post on LinkedIn interest group sites? Is it okay to post this information on LinkedIn interest group sites?
Yes.
Sure.
When and where will the outcomes of the pilot be available?
I think that's a great question. I'm pleased that people are interested. I don't know, but we'll certainly announce that and let people know. But we don't have we're just starting to recruit companies to be part of a pilot at this point. So.
Are you thinking of working with any associations? Sometimes individual companies are shy to participate.
I think that's another excellent point. We've been invited to provide a tech talk with for the Society of Automotive Engineers in Detroit, their Detroit chapter. But I think we're interested in talking and working more with associations. And if people have suggestions for those we could contact or who might be interested, I think we're open to that. I don't know, Rich, if you have other comments on that.
No, that's a good answer. I'd agree. Yeah, the more the merrier.
Okay. As a comment, the UC Berkeley Extension used to offer a green chemistry certificate program. However, it has been canceled due to lack of interest. Students from the program have been trying to find a solution to save the program, perhaps by finding an organization that can host the materials. I guess that's...
I wasn't aware it had been canceled. That's good information. I know I've talked with the folks out there a couple of times when I've been out there. So
I mean, I think that is that the student certificate program?
No, it's through the UC Berkeley Extension. So which is like lifelong learning activity.
Continuing education. Probably.
Yeah. Yeah.
Well, anyway, I'm not sure what we can do. Although, I mean, it sounds like it's useful work. So, but I don't know about it. So I'm not sure how we can contribute or help.
Well, I mean, one thing it seems to indicate is that, of course, that's on the West Coast, and it's a little bit out of our reach, perhaps, but in general, it seems to point to the need for more education to stimulate the interest in green chemistry. I think that my sense is that the more people understand about it, the more interest there would be in it, and I think that's what we're all trying to do here. But I think that's a very interesting point that they had to cancel it, and I think that's kind of a message to us. Here's another comment. By the way, the GC3 launched the GC3 Green Chemistry Education webinar series, which is geared towards professional education in green chemistry. We had our first webinar on the value of green chemistry with HP, Genetech, and Elevance presenting. You can view audio archive with slides from the GC3 website. More educational webinars to come.
Yeah, I've been on the GC3 webinars, and they're terrific. And I mentioned it earlier. I think that they are always a source of these webinars for companies that are interested in educating their employees or providing these resources for employees and suppliers. And and there's more to come. And again, I think maybe we can talk about even extending those depending on as interest grows. And I wanted to go back to the UC Berkeley thing. You know, that's one thing I was going to mention is that I think part of the importance of companies actually doing the things that are in the checklist are exactly what Lynn mentioned, driving more interest and demand for this kind of activity at all levels and as well as in academia. So, but maybe at some point we could talk more about the Berkeley situation.
Yeah, I mean, I would love to see the Great Lakes Green Chemistry Network be able to offer more of this kind of webinar as well. And, you know, that's something that I think we could begin to explore. I don't think you can have too many of them. And, you know, we've seen interest in our webinars grow over the last couple of years. So maybe that's another avenue that we can explore with our webinars as well. Do we have any more questions or comments? We have a lot of time left.
Mrs. Clinton, I'd like to make a comment.
Please.
Sort of like, you know, listening to this conversation, it takes me back to the very first question we had about metrics, you know, and that the ultimate metric needs to be reduction in toxics. And so I think it's important, you know, I mean, even though I recognize that I don't think we shouldn't lose sight of how important it is to have these proximate metrics as well. It's recognized it's really hard to do that, to measure the reduction. And yet at the same time, we talk about the need for education. We talk about the need, you know, to convince companies to hire. We're talking now about all these, you know, opportunities to educate. So what is the metric for that? How do we know that that education is actually achieving anything? Now we can offer all these webinars, we can put together all these materials. So I think that's why I'm just going to make a point and stress that, you know, that's how we get to that ultimate goal of reduction, is that there's a lot of stages we have to go through. And we need good metrics along that whole process to know that all these tools, all these webinars, all these things that we're doing, all this time and energy we're spending, it's a stage gate process. We need metrics to know that we, you know, at every stage that we're going in the right direction. So even though I appreciate the comment about the ultimate metrics, I don't think we should lose sight that we also need metrics to know that we're actually doing the right activities, you know, to get to that ultimate metric. And I think that's one of the things that this checklist is doing. I mean, so again, you hear about all these opportunities for webinars and training. They're out there, and definitely there's a good opportunity to now maybe compile all of them into one central place. But ultimately, if business is not using them, are they serving a value, at least in the business sector? So again, this checklist helps to bring that to light. And by having a metric that says how many trainings are you actually doing, that gives us a sense. That gives us a sense that all this material we're generating is getting into the hands of the intended audience. If that then happens, then hopefully the next step will happen. R&D dollars will be spent. And then we have a metric on that that hopefully will lead to new innovative designs. And once those new materials get out onto the market, because of those new hires you made, because of that new education they have, that ultimately those new materials will replace the existing materials. And then we may be in a position to ultimately measure that very ultimate metric that we're hoping to achieve. Thank you.
I'd like to really second that, because we, in our project of doing workshops, in terms of trying to assess the success of the workshops, you know, we followed a model from the Safer Chemicals Challenge program, which is a program that has been designed and is being operated by the National Pollution Prevention Roundtable, and that was to measure the reduction in waste, in use and reduction and elimination of use of toxic chemicals or alternatives, use of alternatives over a long period of time as a result of, you know, joining the program or using the tools that are offered in the workshop. And it's quite true that that's a really difficult metric to achieve, to measure and to really make that kind of assessment. And I think that this conversation is very useful to me, I must say, because I think it is really important to go back a little earlier and figure out how to have milestones along the way to be seeing also figuring out what trainings are the most valuable. I think it's important to note, though, that the green screen trainings, which probably many people are familiar with, have been very successful in terms of really attracting a large number of people. And the green screen itself has been a very popular tool, which has also attracted a large number of users. So I'm not sure how that fits into all of this, but I think it is an indication that there is a lot of interest in there, about this out there, but it's trying to figure out how to mobilize that interest and how to address that interest.
So I'd like to just follow on from my comment before and say, another reason why I think, just a full disclosure, I'm also on the Roundtable. So I feel that one of the reasons why this is a natural fit for the Roundtable to develop this checklist is because it recognizes the synergies between what's written in the policy statement from the Green Chemistry Commerce Council and the roadmap, the action plan that was actually developed for the Michigan Green Chemistry Program. So the directive calls in Michigan calls for reduction in toxics being released to the environment, improved public health, and economic growth and development, which are very grand challenges, grand charge. And the action plan that was written, I'll encourage everyone to look at it. So then, well, how do we even begin that journey? Since it is so hard to measure that final ultimate thing of toxic reduction, improve public health, how do we break that down? So we recognized the core activities that needed to happen. And then we had a long time discussing what are the metrics, that we need, what are the indicators and what are the metrics to know that those are the correct core areas to be working on, and that we're actually making progress in those core areas. So I think the synergy that I talked about is the fact that those same core areas that are in the action plan are reflected in this policy statement. So this makes really nice, fact, a natural place for the Roundtable to working on this checklist.
I want to just add one thing, just highlight something that I said earlier. I agree with everything that's been said about the challenge of proximate metrics versus sort of looking at outcomes. But we're really interested if people have ideas about outcomes. One of the challenges of doing the checklist is we actually were talking about keeping it on 2 pages. It's now on 4, but really making it workable and not overwhelming, and for businesses to be able to collect the data and on the recommended metrics relatively easily. But I think that we're all really interested in thinking about those outcome metrics, and I can imagine including metrics around, for instance, training that would try and get some handle on whether there had been any, well, first even how the employees, for instance, found the trainings and whether they thought the trainings were useful, and then based on just evaluations, whether they report that they're going to change any practices based on those things. So one can imagine moving towards some more outcomes in a lot of these measures, but we wanted to do it in a way, that is really workable for businesses and not overwhelming. I mean, that was one of the key things. So, but I think all of us are really open to ideas there. And also, this is just the first version, and we do anticipate making lots of changes. And so I think that comment is really an important one for us to continue to consider.
We also have another comment, which is that commenter says, I think there is a lot of concern for companies to talk about reductions in toxic chemicals. Most don't want to admit that they ever used a toxic chemical, even when they have made improvements. And then I'm going to read another comment, and then people can respond to both of them. I think perhaps there needs to be a webinar just on how one evaluates and measures toxics reduction. My experience is it's both easy and difficult. Easy because you just take two products and say, this one contains these toxic chemicals and this one doesn't. Difficult because of lack of disclosure from a consumer viewpoint. In a business, might also be difficult if they don't know the chemicals in their supply chain. Those are actually kind of related. People want to respond to those comments?
I think they're just excellent comments. I think it's absolutely right. I mean, we are really operating from, we're operating from an area of a lot of ignorance in terms of understanding supply chains, even having shared definitions of what is toxic. I understand that there are real business concerns about how they talk about these things publicly. I think those are all really valid comments and real barriers and concerns from the perspective of business. I think that you can always talk about a business being dedicated to continuous improvement and continuing to evolve and improve without talking about your previous products being terrible. I think there are ways to certainly frame that, but I think they're excellent comments, and I think again, I think this is a positive of the checklist. It starts to provide some empirical ways in which to look at your activity that isn't just the measuring toxic reductions. Anyway, I don't know what others have to say about that.
Do we have other comments, or?
Well, this is Clinton. I was just thinking about it a little bit, and I agree with the statement. I think it's a little bit more complex than that, though. I think the simple idea that's been proposed is that just like we can have a carbon footprint, we can take a product A and B, and we can measure, quantify, a carbon footprint, and now you have this very solid number that you can say, one's higher or lower than the other. And we can do that for lots of things, like embodied energy and carbon footprinting. When it comes to toxicology, it's not just the absence of information that's the problem. It's the ability to do that mass balance calculation that further adds to the complexity. So I appreciate the comment, and obviously the comment at the state that was both simple and complex. But as I was listening to that, it just struck me that that was the one piece I felt wasn't mentioned, that even in the presence of full information, it's still a difficult thing to do.
Right. There's a lot more uncertainty and difficulty in doing the assessment in any sort of quantitative sense. It's quite challenging.
Just putting my NGO hat on, I think that one would say that doing some kind of an assessment of chemical use and prioritizing within that, and then working towards hazard reduction is always a good, way to move forward. And that there are a number of tools out there, I think, that are in use and are being developed that help businesses do that.
We have another interesting comment here. Comments on green chemistry vis-a-vis sustainability. Some are concerned that focus on toxicity alone may ignore issues on energy, materials use, socioeconomic issues.
Yeah, I'll chime in on that. I generally use the word sustainable chemistry and engineering more than green chemistry and engineering because I think it more clearly includes those things. Although if you do go back and read the green chemistry book by Anastas and Warner, it covers a wide range of issues, including energy efficiency, mass efficiency, and the implicit need to have economics in there as well. So it was part of green chemistry from the start. We do tend to focus more on hazards when we talk about and use the term green chemistry, but really it is a broader term than that, and one way of reminding folks of that is to use the term sustainability instead of green chemistry. There's a lot of overlap between those fields.
I want to just add that it's been my observation that actually there's a lot of focus within companies around energy and energy efficiency and energy reduction, and there's a lot of focus around waste and waste reduction. And there has been, at least in the past anyway, less of a focus on hazard reduction and the benefits of hazard reduction. And so kind of emphasizing that a little bit more, I think, was to just respond to that it tends to not get covered as much. I think that's starting to change, but I think that's why people really talk and emphasize a lot the hazard reduction component of green chemistry, even though it does deal with those other issues as well.
Yeah, I mean, one of the things that we say a lot in the network is that all of green chemistry is pollution prevention, but not all pollution prevention is green chemistry. And I think that that is exactly what Tracey was talking about, and why we do put, we tend to put a lot of emphasis on the hazard aspect and the chemicals aspect on the sustainability spectrum, I guess, and that green chemistry is part of sustainability, but that it's not clear to me that they're synonyms for each other, I guess is how I would put it. And I think that question was explored in a kind of really interesting way at the Michigan conference, and I hope that there will be that will be an ongoing conversation, actually. We have time for a few more comments, and I have one more here that says, I agree with Clinton and Tracey. It's easy to sign on to a statement or commitment. The rubber hits the road when you ask the tough questions, hold a mirror up to find out what is actually being done to move down the path to pursue green chemistry. Where are the gaps? What are the resources needed? It would be great to ask the companies to share that information in a safe way so that we can figure out what is needed. It could be done anonymously, and it would still be helpful.
That's an interesting comment, and maybe it suggests that we should invite companies to provide feedback on the checklist, and just indicate if they want that feedback to be. I mean, it will be anonymous anyway. We're not going to. I don't think we would attribute particular companies to particular comments. But anyway, I agree that some of those key questions are what are the gaps and what are the resources needed and where are the barriers. It continues to be a question that we're asking those of us interested in really trying to drive green chemistry implementation. But maybe we can use this feedback as a way to get at that question.
Well, I think also just like with the broader goal of being able to measure impacts on the environment, and we viewed this as a starting point in that journey. We did talk a lot about whether this is going to be an internal assessment or a publicly reported kind of framework, and said that, well, for starters, we'll look at the internal assessment and encourage people to talk about stories and progress in it, but we want people to start using it internally first. So let's begin there.
I think that's one of the, I have to say I think that's one of the really important and things that the GC3 has contributed, is that it has brought companies together who are willing to pool a lot of information, not confidential business information, obviously, but to work together on a lot of these issues in a way that, in a forum that's been conducive to a more collective discussion rather than what we frequently perceive as an, unwillingness or inability to address some of these key questions from an aggregate perspective rather than from a one-by-one perspective. And I think that would be a great breakthrough if we could figure out how how we could aggregate that information in a way that would be acceptable to everybody who's involved in it, in the gathering and the use of the information. Okay, we have time for one more comment. Perhaps instead of reduction in toxics, we should say increased use of safer chemicals.
Hear, hear.
That seems like a really good note to end on. I really want to thank everybody, all of our participants. Thank you so much to our panelists and to the Michigan Green Chemistry Roundtable for joining us today and sharing the green chemistry checklist with us. And to all of our participants who called in on the line. I think this has been a great webinar. I really want to encourage all of you to take the checklist and, be willing to try it out, or to at least, and also to tell your colleagues about it.